The first time I engaged in deep Talmud learning, I was studying at Hadar. I knew I'd walk into the traditional texts of Talmud learning, but there were certain things I wasn't yet ready for. One such text was based on a passage in Deuteronomy, that of the Ben Soreru Moreh, the wayward and rebellious son. According to the Pasuk of Tanakh, this child is brought to the townspeople by his parents, and the elders were responsible for putting him to death on the basis of his behavior. The Talmud grapples with what behaviors would result in this terrible punishment. These texts were hard to learn, so why was it valuable to learn? Was it the technical skills that the chapter of Talmud would offer? A Talmudic argument that was maybe easy relatively to understand? Was there something my teachers wanted me to discover that I didn't yet know? Throughout the Torah, there have been shocking texts that our ancestors and we have interfaced with. We constantly return to these texts. Each time, we're a little different. I want to suggest that one way to keep coming back to challenging texts is through working on our own individual relationship to change. Adrienne Marie Brown wrote a book about a term she coined called emergent strategy. Emergent strategy, or we can say emerging from history into our ideal future, is a way to build new systems through small changes in hopes of imagining a more hopeful future. Deep change starts with shaping the smallest patterns of our daily lives while accepting that change is non-negotiable and history must evolve. This change begins by understanding the way people have affected change and how our ancestors responded to change in their specific time. I want to introduce today's Torah reading in light of emergent strategy. This Torah reading from Parshat Acharei Mot is one that poses extreme challenges in many communities of the world, especially that of the LGBTQ community. Within them, we will hear a verse that has been historically used to justify homophobia and anti-queer biases. Though I myself am not a queer person and therefore do not know the personal pain of hearing these verses, I'm here to offer some thoughts on how to cope with Torah that shocks and harms. Take care of yourself as I do. Sometimes we're ready to reconcile with tough pieces of Torah. Others, we don't want to hear about them at all. Brown has 9 core principles of emergent strategy. One is never failure, always a lesson. How can we learn something from this difficult passage that does indeed fail many of our visions of a healthy and whole Jewish relationship? Can we accept this Torah reading as a lesson and a failure? A lesson to struggle with Torah, be in a human relationship with our Torah, and allow that relationship to evolve year after year? We're already doing the work of reflecting on the evolution of ourselves and our relationships throughout Yom Kippur. Can we also do so with our relationship with our Torah? This brings me to another of Brown's principles. What you pay attention to grows. We're humans with autonomy. We fully have the option to skip this Torah reading or walk out of the room. But how can we grow our relationship with our tradition, maintain our uniquely human relationship with Torah, if we only grapple with certain parts of it, if we don't grapple with it as a whole? We grow our relationships not just with our tradition, but with each other by facing it together. Later in our Tanakh, we hear a powerful line in the book of Ezekiel. V'gam ani natati lahem chukim lo tovim umishpatim lo yichyu bahem. I gave them, the Jewish people, laws that were not good and rules by which they could not live. In the Tanakh itself, our prophets struggle with the viability of Torah laws. This, too, is how the Talmudic conversation on Ben Soreru Moreh ultimately ends. The rabbis of the Talmud, likely parents with children who act childlike, ultimately conclude that the child should never be stoned and that this case could never really have existed. The rabbis emulate the exact relationship with change that Brown suggests. By paying attention to the minutiae of Jewish law and extracting lessons from a seemingly impossible verse, they teach us that they too grappled with Torah, just like we can. That brings me to one final principle of emergent strategy. Change is constant, be like water. Brown tells us to invest in the capacity to adapt, expecting your work and life to change instead of trying to prevent change. The voice in Ezekiel and the rabbis in Sanhedrin recognized early on, way earlier than any of us, that change from Torah law might be necessary, but just as necessary as grappling with the Torah itself. Conversation is valuable at a time and emotional time that it can take place. We will not change the words of our Torah, only the ways in which our community can emerge from it with understanding. I'm not sure we can ever reach a place of being at peace with the verses of Torah we're about to read, but we can create a world of acceptance and opportunity to embrace change if we're explicit about where we came from, work to reconcile with our past, and imagine together the more accepting Jewish future we are building.